Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Final Score. Today, we're going to be talking all about the NBA. The news in the NBA world today is about Lamarcus Aldridge and his shocking retirement. So, we'll get into that. We'll talk about Jamal Murray's season ending injury, what that's going to mean for Denver. And we're going to take a look at the Eastern and Western Conference playoff outlooks and how we think that's going to shape out the rest of the way. So, let's get right into it. All right, so guys, clearly the main story of the day, the shocking news this morning. Marcus Aldridge announced via Twitter that he's going to call it quits after 15 seasons.
I just wanted to read the letter that Lamarcus Aldridge wrote to all the NBA fans and to announce his retirement. He said, "My last game, I played while dealing with an irregular heartbeat. Later on that night, my rhythm got even worse, which really worried me even more. The next morning, I told the team what was going on, and they were great getting me to the hospital and getting me checked out. Though I'm better now, what I felt with my heart that night was still one of the scariest things I've experienced. That being said, I've made the difficult decision to retire from the NBA. For 15 years, I've put basketball first, and now it's time to put health and family first." So that was just a little excerpt from his retirement announcement.
Yeah. So first and foremost, obviously, great news that he's healthy and doing well and stable. Because anything dealing with heart and a regular heartbeat, like that's scary stuff that could have been potentially fatal. So for him and his family, obviously, thrilled that he's okay. But for the basketball side of things, this is devastating news to the NBA world.
Yeah, it's devastating for the NBA world, and it's tough to see Lamarcus Aldridge go out like that.
Yeah, definitely. After playing his last game, where you could clearly see watching it, he didn't look like himself. Ever since coming to Brooklyn, he's looked excellent on the defensive end, and he was getting just owned by Drummond all night. He got clowned on Twitter. People were calling for his head because of how badly he played, and he said after the game that he had a hard time getting going, and now we can see why. He's having heart issues, and it's just crazy to think that he played his last game and had no idea at the time. No one had any idea Lamarcus Aldridge was playing his last NBA game.
I think it's really tough after the career he had. Everyone had the expectations that he was going to be winning a ring this year with the Nets. And just to go out that way after, 15 seasons, 7 All-Stars, every year, he was a great player, added value to his team, even, at this point in his career. So it's really tough to see him go out like this.
Definitely. And a lot of respect to him, for understanding what's most important and understanding the importance of his health and being there for his family. Because that's not an easy decision to make. Like you mentioned, somebody that has been through so much in his career, and we'll get into his accolades in just a minute. But one thing he never achieved was a ring, and that's why he went to Brooklyn in the first place. And Brooklyn's the favorite to win, so he appeared to be in good shape to get that ring. And now all of a sudden, so close to that final prize, he's got to call it quits. So definitely not an easy decision, but a lot of respect to him for putting health first. And we're definitely happy that he's stable and doing well. Jay, do you want to just bring up a little bit of his accolades?
Yeah. He was a 7-time All-Star, 5-time All-NBA team. He made it in his rookie year on the All-Rookie first team. He ended up with close to 20,000 career points, just shy of 8,500 career rebounds, and that was all in 15 seasons.
Yeah, so I think Aldridge is somebody that's kind of been very underrated for the majority of his career because part of it was, playing in the West at the same time as Dirk, Kobe, Steve Nash in the beginning of his career. And then later on in his career, Golden State Warriors and that dynastic Spurs team. So Aldridge was kind of always overshadowed, but he's been the model of consistency throughout his career.
And his impact on teams is really overlooked because I was looking at a statistic where of all the Hall of Famers, he's top 60 in plus minus for his career. He has a positive plus minus with a 1.7. And even though that's just like a really obscure stat, it just shows how much, even late in his career, the effect he had on his team. The Spurs he was really helpful with. Even Brooklyn, we saw early in his games, like you said, he was having a really positive impact on the game.
Definitely. Also, you look at where he ranks all time as far as active players. In total points scored, he's sixth all time. That's ahead of guys like Chris Paul, Dwight Howard, Steph Curry, his former teammate Damian Lillard. And then in rebounds among active players, he's fifth all time, ahead of guys like Carmelo, Kevin Love, Russell Westbrook, other guys that are up there. But truly, great career for Lamarcus Aldridge. Whether or not he'll make the Hall of Fame remains to be seen. But still, he was an impactful player for a very long time.
Yeah, he's definitely always going to be remembered as an NBA great. Obviously, for him personally and any fans of Marcus Aldridge are going to want to see him get to the Hall of Fame. But whether he makes it or not isn't going to take away at all from his career.
Definitely. Also, another one I just found: LeBron and Carmelo Anthony are the only active players with more career 2-point field goals than Lamarcus Aldridge. So just really the model of consistency throughout his career. So let's get into the basketball side of things and what this loss means for Brooklyn.
I think it hurts a tiny bit just considering that, they've brought in Blake, they've brought in Aldridge, some vets to help out maybe with development of young guys like Aldridge could have been helping Claxton out. You never know, but I don't really think on the court this is going to hurt them that much because even with but Kyrie, Harden, and KD, that team was already finals contender. Kyrie and KD were already finals contenders. So, adding all these guys is great, but Aldridge isn't going to be like, oh, Brooklyn's in trouble.
Yeah, I think one thing that was really underrated about Aldridge's move, and when you watch him play in his few games with Brooklyn, he added a dimension to their offense that they didn't have because outside of Kevin Durant, the Nets didn't have any post scorers. And then they add Blake Griffin, who's a post scorer. But LaMarcus Aldridge is somebody you can throw the ball to in the post, and he can get you a turnaround jump shot whenever you need it. But he was also a tremendous passer out of the post, which when you have as many lethal shooters and scoring weapons as Brooklyn does, he just makes that team that much tougher to guard on offense.
And he also brought some defense to the table, which the Nets were lacking.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he was actually a pretty big piece to this team, and I think it actually could hurt Brooklyn on the defensive side quite a bit.
Yeah, it's Aldridge is always talked about as an offensive player. That's what he'll be known as because that's what he was best as. But while he was never a great defensive player, especially later on in his career, you start to see him become a plus on the defensive end just because of his IQ, knowing where to be. He is a big body. He knows he's got good hands. So we saw some good defense in his short stint with Brooklyn, of course, before his most recent game. And maybe the scariest part for Nets fans about losing Aldridge is that it means DeAndre Jordan, who's been out of the rotation ever since getting Aldridge, now he's back in the rotation and he's going to have to play a crucial role on this team.
Yeah, that's not good news for Nets fans. DeAndre Jordan shouldn't even be on the team.
Jordan has been...
He's there because of KD.
Yeah, and, he struggled defensively for the better half of the season. I will say, did you guys watch? You probably didn't watch the Sixers-Nets game last night.
No,
but
I just saw the Sixers chant KD sucks.
Yeah, so DeAndre Jordan actually did a solid job against Joel Embiid. Now, Joel Embiid still had a really good game because he's Joel Embiid. But Jordan, I think he had 14 rebounds. He had a lot of lobs, like alley-oops, and he held his own against Embiid defensively. And that's the biggest question mark for the Nets, really, in a series, specifically against the Sixers, is they're small. They get beat by big. So who's going to guard Embiid? The Nets need DeAndre Jordan to be that guy now.
How big is Claxton?
Claxton's like 6'11".
He's a better wing defender.
He's big and long, yeah, but he's still thin.
Yeah.
So Claxton's most valuable at guarding guards and wings because of his length, his height, makes it a tough matchup for them. He struggled a little bit against bigs just because he doesn't have that size yet. He's still thin.
Yeah.
And so that's, what we need to talk about is who steps up in Aldridge's absence. I think DeAndre Jordan's the clear one. And he was not in the rotation, and now he's probably going to start a lot of games. So he'll need to step up. Blake Griffin's probably going to have to play a bigger role as well. But it's just, you don't quite have that player that can replicate what Lamarcus Aldridge did.
And I think, too, with Lamarcus Aldridge, being on a team with Kyrie, KD, and Harden, when you had those guys on the court, they're focused on them. And then you're leaving Aldridge, with maybe not such a great defender on him. And, you put him in that post move, and he's going to make him pay because even at this point in his career, he was still a great offensive player, a great scorer. So I think that's going to hurt them a little bit, having that type of player who the defense isn't really worried about that can drop 20 in a game where they need him in the playoffs.
Absolutely. And we talk all the time about how playoff basketball is so different. And guys like Lamarcus Aldridge
Perfect.
are perfect for playoff time because in the playoffs, you see the pace slow down. You see better defense. You see longer possessions and tougher shots. And Aldridge is somebody, again, you give him the ball in the post. You don't need to move the ball around a ton. You can feed him the ball in the post, and he'll hit a tough, hook shot or contested jump shot. Or he's an excellent passer out of the post. So double team comes, he can find the open man. So that is very valuable in the playoffs. And the Nets have more than enough to get by without him. Let's make no mistake about that. But he will be missed by the team for sure.
Absolutely.
So while we're at it, do you want to talk about the Eastern Conference now and then get into Jamal Murray when we talk about the Western Conference?
So you want to just get into the playoff race?
Yeah, so the playoff race right now, that big game between the Sixers and the Nets. So the Sixers won. Nets were without, obviously, Lamarcus Aldridge. They were without KD, without Blake.
Did Harden play?
Harden didn't play. Harden's been out. So it was just Kyrie. And the Nets were down big, made a huge comeback, and just fell short late. So what do we think of how the Eastern Conference is going to shake out?
I think the 1 and 2 spot, it doesn't really matter a ton who plays those guys in the first rounds. They're, in my opinion, going to end up facing each other in the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think the more interesting part of the East so far is that 4 to 8 to 10 range.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as a Knicks fan, I don't want to be part of that plane because currently the Heat and the Hornets, Pacers, and Bulls are all part of that. And when you're 6 and up, you don't have to deal with that. So I'm really, really interested to see how this shakes out. I think the Hawks are going to solidify the 4th spot. I think they're playing phenomenal, especially with Nate McMillan as a coach taking over for Lloyd Pierce. Celtics are on a roll, Knicks are on a roll, but it's going to be very weird to see the Heat if they really do finish 7 or 8, or even if they don't even make it in the play-in, which I think they will, but after making it all the way to the finals, it's really weird to see them sitting at the bottom.
I actually think that the 1 and 2 spot is pretty important if the Heat are going to end up falling
That's true.
at the
That's
7.
true.
Because you do not want to play the Heat in the first round. So if they do get the 7 and the Nets get the 2, then the Nets can potentially lose first round.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, the Heat are the biggest threat to Miami over the 76ers.
No, the biggest threat to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yes, my man.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that 1-2 battle is, so the Sixers have a 1-game lead on the Nets, but they also have the tiebreaker now. By winning that game last night, they have the tiebreaker over them, so it's basically a 2-game lead. By Brooklyn sitting out Durant and Blake Griffin, obviously, Aldridge couldn't play, but by sitting out those guys and just rolling out there with Kyrie and kind of the B team, they kind of made a statement that they're not that worried about getting the 1 seed. I think they're more concerned about getting healthy for the playoffs, which for them I think is the right move, but it also gives the Sixers a much better chance at landing that 1 seed. And as far as Miami, I completely agree. Any of those top 3 teams, Sixers, Nets, Bucks, none of them want to face Miami. So if Miami ends up as a 7 or 8 or even a 6 seed for Milwaukee, they're going to give teams problems. They knocked out Milwaukee last year, and if Milwaukee gets stuck facing Miami again first round, they could be in trouble.
And we talk about playoff basketball being so much different than regular season, and the Heat are built for playoffs, especially when your leader is Jimmy Butler.
Absolutely. They're a deep, extremely well-coached team, and now battle-tested. A team that's been to the finals, a team that's been to the finals while being, what was their seed last year?
5 or 4?
Yeah, they weren't a top seed.
Yeah.
So they've gone against the odds and made it to the finals once. And although they've struggled this year, anybody who counts out the Heat is foolish.
Yeah.
So I guess how do you think? I think we all kind of look at the Hawks as the most likely for that 4 seed. But again, this 4 to 8 spot in the East is separated by 2.5 games.
I do think a team that's going to be falling a little bit sitting at the 8 is the Hornets.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of injuries, so it's really impressive that they've stayed afloat this long, but I think they might be the odd man out.
Yeah, I agree. And it's unfortunate for Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
They're one of the better stories in the league this year, and They came out with LaMelo Ball, Gordon Hayward, all these guys playing
And Terry
great.
playing out of his mind.
Terry's having the best season of his career, and they lose LaMelo, which was a big loss for them, but then they stay afloat. They're still winning games. You're like, okay, maybe they can survive without Melo. And then, unfortunately, they lose Gordon Hayward, too. And so it's going to be really tough for them. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Indiana, who's starting to play a little bit better of late, take over that 8 spot, and you see Charlotte fall. But to me, I still think the Pacers and even the Bulls, now that they have Vucevic, are probably better than Charlotte, who's banged up. So the real discussion comes between these 4 teams here, 4, 5, 6, 7. Atlanta, Boston, the Knicks, and Miami. So how do we see that shaking out?
I'm going to have Atlanta solidified, making the playoffs. I think they're going to be 4 or 5. I think Boston's going to be there too. Tatum and Brown have been playing phenomenal lately. The Heat are definitely going to be here. They might slide up to the 6, and the Knicks might slide down a little bit. But as a Knicks fan, I'm really worried about us staying above that 7 because I don't want to be in a play-in just because it's, a pretty stressful situation as a fan. And, definitely for the players too. So I'm going to see Hawks and Celtics probably with the 4-5, and then Knicks and Heat could swap with that 6-7.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see the 4-5 changing, JD.
I'm a Knicks fan, and I'm going to keep going to war with the Knicks. I'm going to put them at the 4.
You think they're going to jump to the 4?
Not even like a biased opinion. You actually think they're going to get the 4?
They're catching heat right now.
I do agree.
They're catching heat at the right time. We got a good schedule.
If we do look at their schedule, right now they've won 4 in a row. It's the first time they've broke past that 3 in a row barrier. They've won that multiple times.
Atlanta's playing the Bucks tonight, so I'm hoping that we can get some losses, get some wins for the
we
Knicks.
Need
and we're going to solidify the 4.
The Knicks.
We also play the Hawks, in a little bit, which could also have a huge jump because of how tight it's been. If we can beat them, then that's a huge swing.
Extremely competitive with them all year. That was when Julius had his 40-point game too.
Mm-hmm.
So the Knicks do have 3 games left against Atlanta, Charlotte, and Boston. So Boston's the last game of the season. So wins in those games would be huge for the Knicks. The problem is Knicks have some winnable games coming up, but they also face a brutal schedule at the end of the season. They got Phoenix coming up. Then they get Bulls, Rockets, Grizzlies. All those are winnable games, but then it gets, you have a West Coast stretch of
3 in a row there.
Denver, Phoenix, Clippers, Lakers,
Denver
and Spurs.
Is beatable now.
Then you get it. Then
they're still really good. I think.
Still beatable.
Who's beatable?
I think
we went
beatable.
we went to like 3-point games with the Nets a few times. We beat the Bucks earlier in the season. I think that we can beat Denver.
The Knicks very rarely. I think this only happened very little times this year. Is where we've kind of been out of the game the entire time. But most games, even if we played a fully healthy Lakers team, fully healthy Clippers, I'm not saying we're winning those games, but it's going to be a close game because that's just the type of gritty team that we are.
It's tough, and the Knicks are playing very good basketball right now. Personally, I think the schedule's too much to overcome, and I think they'll end up around the 7th seed.
Do you think we're going to get 7th seed with the play-in? Is that what you're saying? Or, do you think we're going to...
I don't know how the play-in shakes out, and I don't know. That's tougher to project than where they'll finish. I'm just talking about where they'll end up seeding-wise, not who comes out of the play-in tournament. And I think that if I had to make my stake of how I think it shakes out right now, I'd probably put the Sixers 1, Nets 2, Bucks 3. I might slide the Celtics up to 4 and the Hawks at 5, Miami 6, Knicks 7, Pacers 8, and then Hornets 9 and Bulls 10.
What I'm going to be saying here is Sixers 1, Nets 2, Bucks 3. I'm going to have Hawks with the 4, Celtics with the 5. I'm going to put the Knicks at the 6 just because they can get a huge confidence boost right here. And I know this is crazy, but our next 5 games are winnable. I think the hardest game out of there is, definitely going to be between Dallas and Atlanta. But if we did win those games, that'd be 9 games in a row, which is obviously crazy. But that could really be huge for the Knicks, especially with that rough schedule late. So I'm going to say they do solidify their playoffs with the 6. Heat get the 7, and I'm going to give the 8 to the Pacers, and then the Hornets and the Bulls. Bulls just aren't playing too well right now, even with Foos.
Also, down the stretch, I didn't realize, but Miami's schedule the last week of the season is very tough. They've got They've got a really easy stretch of basketball coming up outside of a game against the Nets, but they got a lot of winnable games in there. But then you look at they got Dallas is going to be a tough one. Then they get Minnesota, but then they got back-to-back games in Boston. Then they have the Sixers and Bucks before they end out the season with the Pistons. So you see a couple big trips here that could swing. It's going to come down to who can win some of these big games. If the Knicks can steal a couple of these big games, then they're going to be in good shape. If Miami can, then they're going to be in good shape. But either way, it's going to make for a fantastic finish.
I do not want the play-in. I don't think I can take that as a Knicks fan.
I'm going to have Sixers at the 1, Nets at the 2, Bucks at the 3, Knicks at the 4, Hawks at the 5, Boston at the 6, Miami at the 7, Charlotte at the 8, Pacers at the 9. Bulls
So you're sticking with you think the Knicks are going to end up as the 4.
We got a lot of home games coming up.
It's a bold prediction.
But we got 6 in a row at home and 6 on the road.
And we're 17 and 10 at home. I think if we win all these games, we can honestly. I'm just gonna keep going to war with the Knicks like I have all year. 4 seed.
I love it, and I really hope it happens. We're only a game and a half back, and we're only half a game back from that 5. So if we can really get this home stretch going, and we can win 8 out of these 9 games that we're currently in this stretch, we're going to be in really great shape.
There's a chance that the last game of the season, Celtics-Knicks, could be a battle for seeding. It's
like a 6.
It's likely that
or 4.
that game will affect the seeding. The one thing about Boston, their schedule is pretty weak. They have a game against.
They're weak.
They've got a game against the Nets and the Suns. They have a game against Portland, and they have 2 games against Miami.
Losses.
Outside of those games, which are going to be tight, the rest of their schedule looks pretty soft. And they have the game against the Knicks, but
they are soft.
So they've won 4 in a row, including wins against Denver and Portland. So we'll see. But this Boston team is playing good basketball, and to me, they're a 4 or 5.
They definitely have turned it around. Tatum has been playing great, especially he showed up in the clutch throughout them for the season. So they're definitely turned it around. They did what Jason Kidd said, 360 degrees.
Definitely. So anything else on the Eastern Conference before we wrap that up and move out west?
Other than the fact that the Knicks are the low-key favorites to win it, not really.
All right. So let's go over to the West, and we'll start with the big news from a couple days ago was Jamal Murray's season-ending injury, and that's a really tough one because Denver had been really starting to come alive as one of the better teams in the Western Conference.
Especially with Gordon.
And we remember what Murray did in the playoffs last year where he's putting up 50 points. I think he averaged like 40 during one of those series. And he was as great as Jokic is, Murray was the reason they were in the Western Conference Finals. Mm-hmm. And, their go-to scorer, their best offensive player, that's a big loss for this Denver team. So what do you think this means for Denver's potential for the rest of the season? Are they still a finals contender?
They definitely were before. I think they definitely were, especially having a star player, with Jokic and then having Murray right there with him. They just feed off of each other so well because it's really hard for Jokic to take over a game, which he definitely can. But I'm saying, what Murray did last year in the playoffs is going to be really hard for Jokic to do. So I think, especially with the additions of Aaron Gordon and everybody, it looked like they really could have went to the finals. But taking out Murray, I don't really see them as a huge finals contender, unfortunately.
Yeah, with Jamal Murray, watching Denver, I was starting to feel like they might be the best team in the Western Conference.
I agree.
And they lose Jamal Murray, and now, you look at some of these other teams that they'd have to face. They'll probably finish around the 4 seed. The top 3 looks pretty set, but if they finish 4 or 5, they'll have to face somebody like Portland or the Lakers, pretty much, are the most likely they'd have to face. And I don't think they have the go-to scorer. Even against Portland, I don't think they could keep up with Dame now. As great as Jokic is, they'd struggle to find clutch buckets offensively. And I don't think they can go shot for shot with teams anymore.
I don't think so either. And for me, the whole season has been Lakers 1, Clips 2, and Nuggets 3. I know Jazz are having an absolutely ridiculous season. Suns, Chris Paul is showing how important he is to teams and how much better he makes them. But I still don't see, even though they're the 1 and 2 seed, for me they're 4 and 5. I value all those 3 teams over them. But unfortunately, Nuggets are going to be this is a devastating loss for them.
Yeah, I thought that the Nuggets could be a pretty good push for the LA teams, who are, in my opinion, the favorites. But I never thought that they were a championship contender. I've never really believed that much in Jamal Murray, in the sense of
he made me believe last year.
Yeah, but it's tough for me to see a scenario where they win when that's like the best they could have played. And they got Aaron Gordon, but Jamal Murray was playing like historic.
He was
dropping like 45 points.
It was best
per
he
game.
could have played for sure. But now you have guys like Michael Porter Jr., who's been healthy the whole year, bringing in Aaron Gordon, who's done absolutely amazing with Denver in his short period of time. So I don't think Murray needed to do that again. I think that was best he could have played, but not what the Nuggets could have played.
But I think Jokic was playing near his best too. Which I'm not saying that they can't play at their best again, but Jamal Murray was dropping 50 points a game.
He was, yes. But I think Jokic is actually.
And I don't think Michael Porter Jr. can make up for 50 points a game.
No, but Jokic has elevated his play, and also.
Oh yeah.
And what Denver's done with their offense in the front court, we have. I don't know if maybe not never, but very rarely have we seen such a dynamic, versatile offensive team. Like, as far as you look at what Nikola Jokic brings at the center position. He's a center who's their point guard.
Yeah.
And you have Michael Porter Jr., who's 6'10", super athletic, and a great shooter. Then you have Aaron Gordon. You add him to the mix, and he's another guy, obviously a freak athlete with a jump shot now and an offensive game, and all of them can play defense. Like, that front court combination is incredible. And then if you have a guy like Jamal Murray who can be a go-to scorer, get you a clutch bucket, that makes this team lethal. And I think losing that, obviously, they're still a very good team, but they're just not lethal to me anymore.
I honestly think with that team, I think LeBron probably would have prevailed in the West, but I think Nuggets would have gave everything they had and probably forced a 7-game series with Clippers, Lakers, because I think they really were that good.
In my opinion, that they definitely could have given the LA teams a run. But I think that the Lakers, Clippers, and I think even Utah was better than Denver. Because
I disagree with Utah.
Because they beat them last year, right? Did it? Yeah.
Yeah, they came back 3-1. Denver did.
But I still think, I was never a believer in Utah, but they're 41-14. It's tough to go up against them. They're the best team in the league, record-wise by far.
It's a little bit just deceiving to me though, because as phenomenal as the Jazz and Suns have played all year, I'm not trying to take away from their achievements at all, but I have never considered them to even be top 3 really in the West. Like, I've considered it, but it's always been LA teams 1 and 2, and I'm really high on the Nuggets. I really like what they've built. So.
It's tough because Denver falls out of the Western Conference.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like you could have made a legitimate case for Denver to come out of the West, and now I don't think you can. No. But still, even looking at the West, like, it's incredible because in the East, it's really a 2-team race for the top. Who's the best team in the East? There's not really much of a discussion that it's anyone outside of the Sixers or Nets. Maybe you could talk yourself into Milwaukee, but not likely.
No, unless Giannis went ridiculous.
But out West, you could make a case. Before Murray's injury, you could have made a case for any of the top 5 teams. And now you take Murray out and they kind of fall out of that discussion. But you can make a case for Utah. You could definitely the Lakers and the Clippers are still the favorites.
Yeah.
But you can make a case for Utah. It's not that hard as they have the best record in the NBA. And Phoenix, which is unbelievable, what Chris Paul,
I think...
Oh my goodness. Phoenix, incredible. They went from missing the playoffs to now having the second best record in the NBA.
What Chris Paul does to the teams that he joins is so underappreciated. It's ridiculous because they really just. What was their huge moves this season? Was just bringing in Chris Paul.
They brought
in a couple other guys.
They brought in. They brought in like a Jay Crowder, other bench guys, but for the most part, their roster looks very similar. And granted, Booker's taken a step up this year.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And Ayton's played better. And even somebody that's, I think, wildly underappreciated in the NBA is Michael Bridges.
Yeah.
He is, one of the better two-way, 3-and-D players in the league, and it's only his second season, third season?
I think Chris Paul, third, because he came out of Villanova when they won.
Yeah, that's right.
See, once again, I think the Suns are better than Denver. Fully healthy Denver. Because
I don't think that. I mean, that doesn't really matter.
I'm just saying.
Not fully healthy anymore.
We were just talking about that for like 15 minutes.
Okay. So you think Phoenix is the number 3 team in the West?
4, behind Jazz, Clippers, and Lakers. Yeah. In my opinion.
I don't know what it is about Phoenix. I mean, because they're obviously winning games and they're obviously a legit team, but I still. As much as I love Chris Paul as much as anyone, and I'm rooting hard for the Suns. I would love to see the Suns come out of the West, just as an NBA fan. But I still have a hard time. I think against Utah, a team like Utah, sure, they could pull out a victory against them. But against the Lakers or against the Clippers, I don't know that they have what it takes to go toe-to-toe with them.
I think what it comes down to a lot is, Lakers, obviously, they've LeBron as their go-to. That's obvious. Clippers have Kawhi, Blazers have Dame. And, I know Jazz got Donovan, the Suns got Booker and CP3. But I think when you just take those guys going head-to-head, what Jamal Murray did last year was unreal to be able to beat the Clippers.
Yeah.
And I don't really see any of those guys having that great of a postseason.
Yeah, and
I think Mitchell could have a great playoffs, though, especially after last year.
And Phoenix is going to be a tough out regardless of who they face. Whether they face the Lakers, the Clippers, none of these teams want to face Phoenix. I mean, any Chris Paul led team is going to fight hard, but then you have a go-to scorer in Devin Booker. You have excellent young center in DeAndre Ayton, and then, like we talked about, Michael Bridges, and depth. And they're very well coached. So Phoenix is a tough out, but, I agree to your point that I don't think they have what it takes to keep up. So let's talk about Utah for a minute. We've touched a little bit on them. I mean, they have the best record in the league. They've been the best team in the league for the entire season, pretty much. So what do we think? People always it's tough with Utah. It always feels like no one ever really thinks that they're the team out west.
Yeah, even at the All-Star break, I was kind of thinking they'll drop down to the 5 or the 4, but they proved me wrong time and time again. They stuck strong this whole year. Donovan Mitchell's got a chip on his shoulder.
I definitely think he did, especially after they gave up that 3-1 lead, and to lose the way they did with Mike Conley grimmed out, because Mitchell initially thought that it went in, and I definitely agree. I think he has a chip on his shoulder because of that. He went out on a mission. He took it personally, like MJ said, and I mean, obviously, they're the team to beat, in quotations, being the 1 seed. But Donovan Mitchell's going to need to have a historic playoffs to be able to do anything.
That's the thing about,
which really stinks, and they're not a free agent destination.
Yeah, that's the thing about the NBA though is we always look and we say, come playoff time, you want stars. You always need stars, and the exception to that was kind of what the comparison a lot of people draw to Utah is those Spurs teams. And now, granted, they had Tim Duncan, and Tim Duncan's one of the better players of all time. But when Tim Duncan was in the league, it was never.
He was quiet.
He was quiet. Superstar. He was a superstar, but he wasn't a Kobe Bryant. He wasn't a LeBron James. But they were obviously had Greg Popovich. They had an incredible system, and they had a lot of depth. Utah has a great coach. They have an incredible system. They have a lot of depth. They have Donovan Mitchell is a superstar. The question is, no. Donovan Mitchell is a star. The question is, can he be a superstar? Because if they're going to win, they need him to be.
Yeah. I think that right now, just talking about this, I don't think any of the teams we talked about can be – they can make it close, but I think it's just the LA teams for me for the West, because I think Utah, Phoenix, Denver, Portland, Dallas, they can all beat each other, but I don't think any of those teams can beat the LA teams.
I definitely think Lakers are going to come out. That's my prediction. Obviously, it's a pretty popular one. And the Clippers, though, I think the Clippers could potentially lose to the Jazz or the Suns. I definitely think that it's going to be extremely difficult. I think the Jazz or Suns will have to play absolutely out of their mind to do so. But it is possible, seeing that we saw them lose to the Nuggets last year. And especially with the narrative that Paul George doesn't show up in the playoffs. If Paul George does show up in the playoffs, I think Clippers could come out. But if he doesn't, I think they could be susceptible to a loss to one of those teams.
The Clippers, to me, when playing at their best, are the best team in the West. The problem with the Clippers is the consistency is not always there. But I
Pandemic Pete.
Exactly. And, the thing is, I mean, the Clippers had obviously that big loss in the playoffs last year, and Paul George disappeared. And even Kawhi played well, but
he didn't do what you would expect.
Yeah, he didn't have, because we saw, the last time we saw Kawhi in the playoffs, he won the finals, and he had one of the best individual playoff runs ever. So
they almost lost to the Mavericks in that first round too.
Yeah, so a lot of people kind of discount the Clippers because of that, because of what happened last year. But I think that this Clippers team is different. I think.
But I also think that losing Lou Will was a big hit to them.
I disagree. I think that Rondo's a better fit for them. And you see, they've won 7 games in a row now since Rondo. But what was one of the problems they had last year is they didn't have a true point guard. They didn't. I mean, they had Pat Beverly, but Pat Beverly's not a point guard in the sense of a guy that can run the offense. So you put a guy that can run the offense with a bunch of scoring threats and a bunch of defensive. Like, I still think the Clippers are probably the most well-rounded team out west.
I thought that was like the most balanced, one of the most balanced trades I've ever seen. Like, because that was exactly what Atlanta needed to score in Lou Will. And for the Clippers, Rondo can be a leader. He's a true point guard, and really he fit the mold of what they needed.
Right, organize the offense.
I think that they are probably the best team in the West when playing the best, but they won 7 games. They played the Pistons twice and the Rockets and the Pacers. So they didn't have a ton of great competition.
Ultimately, what it's going to come down to in the West for me is, I think with most people, the Battle of LA, but LeBron. How LeBron bounces back from this injury. Mm-hmm. We know we're expecting, a Nets-Lakers finals, and if LeBron can get there, I think that's just going to be what everyone wants to see.
So, I mean, our consensus is the Clippers-Lakers, I think, as the top 2 teams in the West,
I think it's like a 55-45 Lakers. I think it's really close.
So, let's talk about that Clippers-Lakers, because that's what we've been wanting, and that's as soon as LeBron and Kawhi, everyone thought that would be the Western Conference Finals last year. Of course, Denver spoiled that. But is this the year we finally get that Lakers-Clippers Western Conference Finals showdown?
I really hope so, and it's tough because you kind of want to see guys like the Jazz and Suns
right.
upsets, but I want to see Battle of LA.
Yeah, I mean, series-wise, Clippers-Lakers is the best you can get. And
can Horton Tucker pull this way past Kawhi Leonard?
Can you imagine?
So
that held them back from Kyle Lowry.
Who's the better? I mean,
the
Lakers get the advantage because of LeBron, but the Clippers are the better team.
Right, and one thing that I think the biggest if is going to be, because LeBron, even though an ankle sprain, it's not as easy to re-injure, but that AD had a similar injury towards KD. And KD, you see, after he came back, he played, and then he was out for a long time. So if AD, they got to be careful and make sure he returns at the right time, because even if he had to miss a few games in the playoffs, because if they miss them, then the Lakers are in big trouble.
If the Lakers don't have Anthony Davis, I'm just going to say this: they cannot come out of the Western Conference. Yeah. They can't.
No.
And I'm as high on LeBron as anyone you'll meet, but they just can't do it. But with Davis, we'll have to see, how well. And another big thing is can Anthony Davis play like Anthony Davis? I mean, in a small sample size earlier in the season, he was really struggling, and now the Lakers still were doing just fine. But I think the Lakers-Clippers is an incredibly well-balanced, and you'd get a great series. And I agree it's probably 55-45, but I don't know.
I just have a tough time.
I might be a little bit higher in the Clippers, I think.
I just have a tough time with Paul George, because even if he does play at his best, if all 4 players are playing at their best, all 2 stars, Kawhi, PG, and AD and LeBron, Paul George is the worst one out of all. I think Anthony Davis, when playing at his best, is better than Paul George. And I don't think it's particularly close either.
I think it is actually close. I think what separates Davis from Paul George is Davis' consistency.
Can do more. Davis can do more, but I think Paul George, I don't think people
We've seen Paul
realize
George
how
put up
good Paul George is.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
I agree, but I don't think
Paul George at his best is an elite player. I mean, we see him during that OKC season. He was in the top 3 discussion for MVP during the first half of the season before he fell off. And again, that's the thing with Paul George, his consistency. But his shot-making ability is right up there with anybody when he's on. he's one of the best wing defenders in the NBA. So I disagree there.
I'm just saying, when it comes to Anthony Davis, I've always put him near the elite category when it comes to the best in the league. I put him like right underneath a tier with like the Joel Embiid and the MVPs. I don't know if I put Paul George in that same list.
No, Davis is better than Paul George. I don't think that's as much what we're arguing, but if both these guys are playing at the absolute best that they can play, I think Paul George is more electric and he might have a bigger impact on the game.
I mean like they're best within reason. I'm not saying like back like 4 years ago when Paul George was in his prime.
I think both teams playing at their absolute peak, the Clippers are the better team. And I think
the Clippers are the better team, but I think if they're both playing at their best, Lakers win. But I think that the Clippers are the better team.
Lakers do have a great roster too. I mean, Schroeder's had a great season, which is kind of an off spot, but he turned down like an $84 million contract.
Yeah. Schroeder has been a great addition for them.
And Trez has played really well. I mean, a guy that has fallen out has been Marcus Gasol.
And I know Anthony doesn't like him, but Kuzma does have ability to get a bucket. I hate him too.
Stand Kuzma.
I can't stand him either.
We do have to get the rest touch quickly on the 6 to 10 in the West before.
Yeah, that's true.
But really quick, the last thing I want to wrap up with this Lakers-Clippers discussion is Andre Drummond. Let's talk about Andre Drummond because he's a big signing. To me, he's not a difference maker. I don't think Drummond's a difference maker.
He's a difference maker when he's the best player on the court. I'd put it that way.
I think
so. I don't think in the roster that they're gonna want to run with Drummond, he's gonna be huge.
I think he'll be more valuable against the Nets because the Nets are smaller and they're not as good on defense. So I think against the Clippers, Drummond might not have as much value, but if they can get past the Clippers, I think he'll be a valuable piece to try to beat the Nets.
I think
because the Nets have absolutely no rebounding.
To me, the Clippers is a brutal matchup for Andre Drummond. The Clippers are a brutal matchup for Andre Drummond, specifically because you look at he's going to be matching up with Serge Ibaka. Now, Serge Ibaka can stretch the floor. Andre Drummond cannot guard the wing at all. And I think in that series, he's going to hurt them on the defensive side. He'll help on rebounding, but also Ibaka, it's not like Drummond's going to be able to bully Serge Ibaka. That's not going to happen. I think that matchup, is definitely going to be a big swing in the favor of Ibaka.
Gasol on him. He's a really good defender.
Gasol's kind of fallen out of the rotation.
Gasol's lost a step this year. He's not the same player. I think we've seen age kind of take over with Gasol. But
he'll help if they have injuries, but I think more they want to put Drummond into that spot. Gasol would have done.
The one thing that Jayden did mention to me the other day that I hadn't thought of, because I just look at Drummond and I think, he's a black hole on offense. He's one of the worst passers for big men in the NBA. I forget the exact stat I read the other day, but it was something that was saying when Drummond gets the ball in the post, I think he passes I want to say maybe 2% of the time or something like that.
God, that's terrible.
Something unbelievably low. He's a black hole on offense. He has no offensive game. He's good for rebounding, and that's it. But in a playoff series, how valuable is that?
So wait, what was the point I mentioned to you?
Oh yeah. So the point Jayden mentioned to me is that LeBron James is one of, and perhaps the best basketball mind of all time.
Yeah.
So if anybody knows how to use Drummond and maximize his ability, because his ability, he's the best rebounder of our generation. So
right behind John Henson.
not generation of our decade, I'd say.
Yeah.
But where was I going with that? Oh yeah. So if anyone knows how to use him and maximize that, it's LeBron. And so that could make him a plus. But I think Drummond on his own is...
I think that's the only reason I trust that Drummond signing is because LeBron has the biggest say on that team, probably more than the coach.
Yeah.
So I think that if LeBron wanted Drummond, there's a reason.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that he knows what he's going to want to do, and he seems to be coaching them all the time. So I think LeBron will make it work.
Yeah. I think what the Lakers need from Drummond is him to be what Tristan Thompson was to that Cavs team. But the difference is Tristan Thompson was good defender and he wasn't a black hole.
Ridiculous crossovers and turnaround fadeaway logo shots.
So what do you guys think for that 6 to 10 range before we wrap things up?
Portland's the best team out of those, and it's not even close. I think
the Mavericks are close. I think.
Maybe. I think Portland's the best out of those teams.
I think I'd say Portland, then Dallas.
Out of these teams, who's the most likely to come out with a first round upset?
Oh, the Blazers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Blazers or Mavericks.
Yeah.
Or I don't think this could happen, but the Warriors, Curry can always
has been playing
ridiculous
over the past 10 games or something.
He's averaging 39 points.
He's playing absolutely out of his mind.
Yeah, he's locking in his interview.
He is, but they don't have enough. They don't have enough around him. Steph's incredible.
Kelly Oubre and Eric Paschal. So
they don't have enough, and that's the same thing with Dallas too. They don't have enough. Luka's incredible, and KP is KP.
KP is okay.
And
Trash bag.
They got some pieces, but it's not enough. Where you look at Portland, they've got Dame, they've got CJ, but outside of that, they've got guys like Robert Covington. They got Yusuf Nurkic, who's a big piece to that team. Ennis Cantor grabbed 30. How many rebounds did he grab?
30.
Unbelievable.
He's a top 5 offensive rebounder in the league. He's ridiculous.
He might be. He's probably the best offensive rebounder in the league.
Noticeable.
Dame said he's the best offensive rebounder that he's ever seen.
That he's ever probably played with or played against. That's probably true.
Yeah, absolutely. And even they have Norm Powell and Gary Trent went off the other day. That was weird.
Yeah, but he's on the Raptors.
Yeah, I know. But because I mentioned Norm Powell, and Norm Powell was traded for Gary Trent.
Norm the Dinosaur.
But yeah, they got Norm the Dinosaur. They got some pieces there.
I think
Trailblazers.
What we look at for that 6 through 10 is pretty much what it's going to end up being.
Yeah, I agree. I think the power. It's interesting if you look at the power balance in the East and the West, because in the East, the top half of the West, I think is more powerful than the top half of the East outside of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But the East, the West is deeper as far as elite teams, but the East, the 4 to 8 is better than the 4 to 8, or not 4 to 8, but then those 6 to 10 in the West.
Yeah,
outside of Portland.
Yeah, I agree.
So you're saying the 4 to 8 for the East is better than the 4 to 8 for the West?
I have to backtrack on this because looking at it again, I realized
because the Lakers are sitting at the 5.
The 1 to 6 in the West is very strong. After that, 7 to 10 is a little bit weaker.
See, so you're pretty low
I think
on
it's
Dallas.
more interesting. Yeah, I am.
I don't think Dallas will do much in the playoffs, but Luka will have to just.
Dallas will be a finals contender soon, but
Jaylen
not yet.
Brunson.
They don't have enough.
Jalen Brunson.
Dallas
I like
needs
Brunson,
to get a big free agent and just continue to build for the draft.
Finney Smith.
I kind of thought Dallas would have gone after Oladipo, and I thought he would have been a really good fit for them.
I'm really scary low on Oladipo.
He's injured all the time, unfortunately.
And he carried the Rockets to 22 losses in a row.
If Oladipo could bring back any of that Pacers performance, because this is just a sidetrack thing a little bit here, but when he was on Indiana, they almost beat LeBron in the Cavs in the first round. So if Oladipo could get back to that form, then he could be really helpful for the Heat.
Definitely. So anything else to touch on in the NBA? I don't think so.
I think we covered pretty much everything.
I think we covered it. Hey, we didn't talk about the 10 to 15 seeds. All right. That's a terrible note to end off on. Thanks to anyone that listened. And we'll see you next time. This has been
The Final Score.